Begin by preparing the flask with the pre-bent ball clasps, tight and flush against the flask walls. This will allow only the top bent portion of the wire clasp to be embedded in the stone matrix, easing its removal when divesting. The inner surface of the flask is covered with a thin layer of petroleum jelly. Then, a small amount of rope wax is placed in the wire slot covering the clasp wire and allowing the flask to be secured to the work surface. Mix a small amount of dental stone, according to the manufacturer's specifications, on a vibration unit to remove any bubbles in the mixture. Then, place a small amount of rope wax in the cast indexes to help secure it to the work surface. Afterwards, apply a liberal coating of stone separator to the exposed surfaces of the cast to ease in its removal from the matrix after boil out. Then, apply a thin layer of the stone mixture to the tooth and wax surfaces to ensure a smooth and detailed replication of the denture wax-up within the matrix. The cast must be trimmed to create a taper, and all undercuts and voids in the cast must be blocked out with wax prior to investing to allow the cast to be easily drawn out of the matrix after boil out. Assemble the flask and back plate together for the appropriate size cast and apply enough pressure to the flask to secure it to the work surface. Determine the size of flask chamber by allowing a minimum of 1/4 inch gap between the cast and the flask walls. Mix stone and water to a pourable state, usually a water ratio 1/4 to 1/3 greater than the manufacturer's recommendations. If the water powder ratio is 30 milliliters water to 100 grams powder, I find 38 milliliters of water to 100 grams powder is sufficient. Pour the stone mixture into the flask chamber so the mixture flows around the entire cast. A little vibration with the spatula, being careful not to disrupt the cast, or an abrupt tapping of the top of the reline jig plate to settle the stone into the chamber prevents any void in the matrix. Guide the top plate of the reline jig using your index fingers onto the top of the flask and secure with stone that is smooth and level. A little seepage of stone material around the backplate edges during investing is preferred to ensure a proper flow. Once the stone matrix is set, use a lab knife to relieve any stone around the edge of the cast and any stone that has seeped onto the base of the cast. The softer the matrix is, the easier the stone is to remove. However, the softer the stone matrix, the more fragile the material is to handle. Remove the backplate by tapping the outer tabs with a spatula, or gripping the flask and tabs with thumb and forefingers. Again, the softer the matrix is, the gentler the user should be with the assembly. Brush any stone debris and dried separator from the cast. Liberally apply stone separator to the outer edges of the matrix and the area relieved around the cast at the base of the flask. but allow the majority of the cast to remain clean and dry so as to have proper adhesion of the cast to the bottom of the reline jig. Mix mounting plaster according to manufacturer's specifications and apply a small amount to the bottom of the cast and to the work surface. Then, after placing the bottom of the reline jig plate to the work surface, add additional plaster to the bottom reline jig and assemble the top and bottom of the reline jigs and secure the assembly together with the reline jig nuts. Be sure to remove any excess plaster from the anterior of the jig and flask assembly so as to allow for its inversion into the pressure pot. Once the mounting plaster has set, the entire assembly can be placed into boiling water for 8 minutes. Once the boil-out time has been achieved, remove the assembly from the water. With boil-out gloves and hammer, remove the reline jig nuts. Then gently, with a back and forth motion, lift the top of the jig and flask portion from the bottom jig and cast portion. If all undercuts are properly relieved and a sufficient taper of the cast has been achieved, the entire assembly would dislodge without any resistance. Place both halves of the assembly in boiling water and rinse and clean wax residue from both cast and flask with clean boiling water. Sprue access holes are carved into the matrix using a lab knife. Once rinsed clean, stone separator is applied to the surface of the cast. The stone cast assembly should be placed in a small amount of water that reaches just to the base of the cast so as to cool and hydrate through capillary action. After the top portion of the flask assembly is immersed in cool water for 90 seconds, the tooth area is dried with pressurized air. Then, the teeth can be prepared by roughening and placing diatorics. Then the matrix is coated with a thin layer of separator, avoiding pooling and coating of the teeth. The teeth are then prepped with monomer or bonding agent, and the flask is reassembled. Once assembled, sprue reservoirs created from rope wax are placed over sprue holes and secured. Mix monomer and polymer according to manufacturer's instructions and pour into inverted flask through sprue holes, then place into pressure pot. Do not allow water in pressure pot to reach sprue reservoirs. Once cured, remove from pressure pot and disassemble.